You're listening to the Unwritable Rant podcast with your host, author, and occasional misanthrope, Juliette Miranda. Go to theunwritablerant.com and you can subscribe on iTunes or connect with the show on Facebook and Twitter.
Hey there, y'all. It's Juliette Miranda. Welcome to episode number 78 of the Unwritable Rant podcast. Today, I have not one, but 2 glasses of bourbon sitting in front of me. So what do you say? Let's kick things off here with a toast. Grab a glass, fill it up, and say cheers. All right. Y'all may be wondering why I have 2 glasses of bourbon sitting in front of me. I assure you, I am not that big of a lush. Yet. I have 2 glasses because one is full of good bourbon and one is full of not so good bourbon. And I hate to say it because this one that I'm not particularly enjoying is actually one that several of y'all have suggested I give a try. It is Beer Barrel Bourbon from the New Holland Brewing Company. Now, full disclosure, I am not a beer drinker. It's just not something that I enjoy. I find it a little bit too thick, I find it a little bit too bitter, just not to my liking. So I have to admit that going into this Beer Barrel Bourbon, I was a little hesitant. And quite honestly, it's just not my thing. Because my taste doesn't necessarily reflect everybody's taste. So just because I don't like this bourbon doesn't mean that you won't. But here's what I know about it. It is a sourced bourbon. It's aged first in an oak cask, and then it is aged for about 90 days in a beer cask. Now, nobody has provided a mash bill for this bourbon, but I can tell you just by taste, it is very, very high in corn. So much so that it is cloyingly sweet. It has this weird sort of grain flavor to it, but what I find really disconcerting about this bourbon is the mouthfeel. It just reminds me of beer foam. I tried adding a little bit of water, that didn't help. Y'all, I have to say it. I don't like Beer Barrel Bourbon. I just don't. And that's why, sitting to my right, I have a glass of 1792 Richmond Reserve Barrel. This, y'all, is to my liking. It is one of the most reliable bourbons I can think of. Completely smooth, bright, fruity, so easy to drink on the rocks, straight, whatever you like. It's delightful. And I'm going to have myself another sip. Hang on, y'all. All right, now that, to me, is what I like. So as we get deeper into February and closer to spring, my guy and I are taking a few more road trips here and there. And we're just getting back from another one to celebrate my birthday. We had a blast, but of course, there was an incident that is all my fault. It was the end of the night, and my guy and I were situated at the bar. We were talking, we were laughing, kissing, touching, behaving like a couple in love, and having a truly lovely evening. Until the bartender walks up to us. Now he's looking incredibly sheepish, a little uncomfortable, and very embarrassed to have to talk to us. But he leans forward and he goes, "Hey guys, that gentleman down at the far end of the bar has asked that I request you stop kissing in public." Now I was taken aback because of all the time that I've spent in bars, I have never once heard an order to cease and desist kissing. And that did not sit well with me. I look down to the far end of the bar and I see a very cranky-looking curmudgeon, refusing to make eye contact with me, but very clearly listening in on our conversation with the bartender. Now, my guy and I were doing absolutely nothing inappropriate, so this guy was just being a dick. And I don't like that kind of attitude, particularly in a bar late at night when there are maybe 7 people total in the place. So I start getting a little riled up, and that kicks my brain into high gear. I start obsessing over the whole thing a little bit. And I'm brought back to a moment several years ago. Very similar to the moment that we are in here at the bar. Only instead of being in a bar, I was sitting in the human resources office of the corporate job that I had at the time. It seemed that wherever I happened to work in the corporate arena, I always had the opportunity to get very well acquainted with human resources. It was never so much a testimony to my work ethic, but more a result of this overly anxious sort of environment where human resources had its fingers not only on my credit score, but also in the contents of my pee. I had come to accept such indignities as routine in a corporate workplace, and that is exactly why that was the last corporate job I ever held. But for the moment, then, I was settled down at the foot of human resources, bracing myself for some sort of bizarre request for bone marrow or spinal fluid because you could never really tell with these people what they would want. Besides, as far as I could think of, there wasn't much of a reason for them to call me in. I hadn't done anything wrong. I was excelling at my job. And the only thing that I could think of that people would have to complain about was the length of my skirts. But when the human resources representative began our little chat with the phrase, "The ladies are talking," I knew it wasn't my skirt that had been found offensive. The whole scene unfolded like a bad musical, and I half expected a gaggle of ladies' auxiliary members to tap dance into the room and start clucking their commentary alongside the human resources rep, who is now sitting there telling me, "You were with somebody, I'm assuming it was your boyfriend, and you were engaged in dramatically inappropriate public affection. This has been brought to my attention by the women of the office place, and they are requesting that you consider your environment before engaging in this type of behavior." Well, my skin was crawling. It was probably the scarlet letter that was burning its way to the surface. And the only thing I could think of was, really? Are we really having this conversation? Because as it was, the pitchforks that those office ladies were carrying were raised over nothing more than a single kiss my guy and I had shared, at lunch, in his car, for less than 10 seconds. And I remembered it distinctly because my guy and I were very new in our relationship at this point in time, and he'd taken me out for lunch that day. And as we said goodbye, I gave him a small kiss, not a big deal. Had we been pressed up against the side of the main entrance of the building, swabbing each other's tonsils, clothing disheveled, human resources and the hens would have had a very valid point about my perceived moral deficiency. And frankly, I would have preferred that to be the case. It certainly would have made accepting the reprimand she was giving me easier. Instead, I was forced to defend my decision to lock my guy in something other than a loose handshake in a place where something like Victoria's Secret, when mentioned at all, was referred to as Vicky's in hushed and embarrassed whispers in the ladies' restroom. So needless to say, my little rendition of "there are worse things I could do" fell flat. I left the Human Resources office with an updated list of things I could not do: make personal phone calls, use the internet for personal business, and kiss my guy on company property. Now, I had been planning on quitting that job for quite some time, and this completely expedited that decision. And as I commiserated with my guy that night at home, asking him how it felt to be with the office whore, I made up a little plan. I don't want to say too much about how it all went down, but I can tell you that the day I turned in my resignation, if you happened to be in the parking lot later on that afternoon, it may or may not have been my head bobbing up and down in my guy's car. But this is what I am thinking about, of course, when I am now here, several years later, sitting at a bar full of adults facing the exact same situation. Well, I thank the bartender for delivering the message. I ask him to make us another round of drinks, and I look at my guy and suggest that he might want to pay the tab now. And my guy looks at me and he knows that I'm up to something. He knows that I'm not going to just sit down and take this little instruction. But I just sit there quietly smiling and sipping my cocktail and waiting for the right moment. I didn't want to make a mistake and inadvertently, brush my leg up against my guy's for fear that that would have us thrown out. So after everything gets settled, the tab, we get our drinks, and I look at my guy and ask him if he's ready to head on up to our room. He gives me the fisheye, but nods his head and says, "Yes, I think that's probably a good idea, my love." So we stand up, collect our drinks and belongings, and begin to make our way out of the bar. But not before I pause, directly in the purview of the curmudgeon at the end of the bar who apparently doesn't like kissing couples. When I can see that he is watching us, I grab my guy. I latch myself onto him as tight as I can, press my lips up against his, and kiss him with all of the passion that I have in my heart. And as we break apart, I pause and I smile and toss my head back and say, "Baby, you are the best brother a girl could ever ask for." And with that, I walked right on out of that bar with my head held high. Because goddammit, you do not tell me when or where I can kiss my guy. And with that, I'm going to have a little bit more bourbon. Hang on, y'all. All right. I feel good now. Unfortunately, it's stuff like that that makes me realize I really am something of a handful. And this became all the more clear the other day. I walked outside to find an invitation stuck in my front door. It was from one of my neighbors. I don't know who because I don't really pay attention. But it was an invitation to a scrapbooking party. Now, my well-intentioned neighbor probably didn't realize that I would sooner vomit blood from my eyeballs than attend a scrapbooking party. So, of course, I had to laugh when I read it at first. But then I felt a little bad because as I read the invitation further, I saw down towards the bottom, it said, if I brought 5 friends with me to this little shindig, I would get a special prize. And I realized right then and there that had I wanted to go to this party and had I had any interest in winning some ridiculous scrapbooking prize, I didn't have 5 friends I could invite to go with me. Quite honestly, I would have a hard time scraping together 3 friends. I've had to accept the fact that I am just not friendship material. That's not to say I'm a bad person, but I totally appreciate the fact that while my guy may find my penchant for wacky misadventures and general snark and stabbiness to be endearing, the rest of the world probably finds it fairly exhausting in person. And I have been this way since I was a kid. I just sought out trouble. For example, when I was a kid, there were 2 children about my age who lived on the same street as me. Now, I far preferred the company of the little boy. We would ride our dirt bikes around the neighborhood, we would play in mud, and we would start small fires with magnifying glasses, which was infinitely more fun than hanging out with a little girl down the road, whose big claim to friendship fame was the fact that she had a collection of dolls kept locked in a glass cage in her bedroom. I tried to be friends with her, I truly did, but things kind of fell out between us when I attempted to break one of her dolls out of its glass prison and play with it. No, you weren't supposed to do that. Those dolls were for looking, not playing. Well, of course, friendships get infinitely more complicated when you enter junior high and high school. So by the time I hit college, and I met my friend Crazytown, it is safe to say that she was the first true friend I had had in a long time. Now, you may recall Crazytown from a couple of episodes back when she nearly got me killed on a roller coaster with a couple of rock stars. But that is just how our friendship rolled. We had insane highs, absolutely manic lows, and we used each other mercilessly to get what we wanted from other people. It is amazing that none of our stupid little adventures ever wound up with either one of us in jail or the emergency room. But I adored my girlfriend. We had an incredibly passionate, ridiculous friendship, and she was everything to me for several years. Now, Crazytown and I attended different colleges, but we both lived at home with our parents in neighboring communities, so we saw each other quite frequently. And one glorious May day, she and I were sitting around her parents' kitchen table, drinking coffee laced with whiskey and talking about our plans for the summer. We had all sorts of things we wanted to do. There were road trips to be had, concerts to be attended, festivals to go to. The only problem was that we were both broke, which I pointed out to Crazytown, and that is when she looked at me with her sweet, loving blue eyes and said, "Well, actually, I've been wanting to talk to you about that. I had an idea." That was enough to send a chill down my spine because Crazytown did not have ideas. She concocted plans. She schemed. There were plots. And by the look in her eye, I knew she wanted help with this one. So I braced myself. It turns out Crazytown had read one too many books in the Babysitter's Club series as an adolescent, because her grand scheme was to turn her backyard into a day camp. You see, Crazytown's parents were going to be taking off for a 2-month summer vacation. They were leaving the house in the care of Crazytown and her older brother, which was indicative of the time. Parents then were inclined to give their kids way more responsibility than they do today. In fact, any reasonable 12-year-old could get a job babysitting. You didn't have to be licensed, there was no certification, no CPR training, and you definitely didn't need a background check. All you had to do was show up. So that is why Crazytown's plan wasn't entirely that far-fetched. And quite honestly, if there was any backyard that was well-suited to a day camp, it would be hers. Her parents had one of those sprawling, fenced-in suburban backyards. It had a 2-story deck, a mini basketball court, a trampoline, and one of those gigantic playground sets complete with swings and slides and towers. But what Crazytown hadn't factored into her little equation was the fact that I strongly dislike children. So much so, in fact, that I actually got myself a job packing boxes at a warehouse just to avoid having to become a babysitter. Even my parents were hesitant to leave me alone with my younger sister for fear that I would neglect her. That is how deep my hatred for children ran. And I told this to Crazytown, and that is when her hardcore sales skills kicked in. She comes over to the other side of the table and sits down next to me and starts playing with my hair. She says, "Listen, the way I see it, we can make a lot of money doing this." By her math, if we kept the camp open 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, considering all of the kids in her neighborhood, it was very possible that we could easily make about $200 a day doing it. And she sees me start to soften a little bit. So she ramps up her sales efforts a little bit more. She says, "Look, every dollar we make will go towards our summer. We'll just do this for 4 weeks, and then everything we make will fund the rest of our summer. It will be amazing." And I'm softening a little bit more, so she kicks it in a little bit more, and she says, "I'll do anything you want. I'll be your slave." She goes, "I'll rub you with suntan lotion. Every time we go out, I'll do your hair, I'll do your makeup. Just do this for me." I'm still not quite sold yet, so she goes, "Fine, here's the thing. You won't have to do anything. Just be there. Lay in the sun all day, get a tan. Just be there. Be an extra set of eyes and make sure no one dies." And with that, I caved. Because that is what people did around Crazytown. I know I did. She was just too pretty. There was no resisting her. So she squeals, throws her arms around me, and says, "This is going to be the greatest thing ever, I promise." Well, 2 days later, her entire neighborhood is covered in flyers for Camp Crazytown. And on the grand opening day, I show up ready to do my exact job. I'm wearing my bikini, I've got my Walkman, and a couple of magazines. So while I'm getting set up on the patio in one of her lawn chairs, Crazytown situates herself at the gate to her backyard with her official-looking clipboard and her money tin. And to be fair, for about an hour, everything went really well. I was only mildly annoyed because every so often a child would run up to me and want something. A juice box, a Band-Aid, and every time I would look at them and ask, "Are you dying?" "No, go away." So if this was the way our days were going to play out, I was fine with it. Until, of course, Crazytown ran up to me looking rather harried and clutching the hand of a sticky-looking child. She thrusts this little girl at me and says, "I need you to watch her for a couple of minutes." Oh, no. I look at my girlfriend and I say, "You made my role very clear. I'm here to make sure no one dies. I am not going to play nursemaid to a toddler." And then I look at Crazytown and I ask, "Why in the hell did you let a toddler in here anyway?" The one bit of forethought that we had put into this whole venture was to put an age limit on Camp Crazytown. No one under 7 years old was supposed to be allowed. Turns out this little girl's mother was rather stealth. She allowed the kid to blend in with some older-looking kids, threw $20 at my girlfriend, and then drove off without a word. Crazytown was so stunned, she didn't have a chance to find out the kid's name, let alone enforce the age restriction. So we were stuck with her. And before I can get any more information, Crazytown runs off, leaving me with a toddler, who, by way of greeting, proceeds to sneeze all over my kneecaps. And these were not dainty little girl sneezes. These were the sneezes of a 45-year-old man with a lifelong history of untreated hay fever. She doused me in an array of multicolored snot and spit that was so sticky and so wet, it started dripping down my legs and pooling into my sandals. Well, this is when my instincts kick in. Now, mind you, my instincts are not nurturing and they are not mothering, so I didn't say, "Hand the kid a Kleenex." I just threw an issue of Cosmopolitan at her, told her to stay put, and then I went off into the house to get cleaned up and disinfected. I admit, I may have stayed in the house a little bit longer than it took me to get cleaned up. Was it long enough to catch the last half of Sally Jessy Raphael on TV? I don't know. I wasn't watching a clock. All I know is that when I went back outside, all hell had broken loose. When I left, there were maybe 10 or so kids in the backyard. When I returned, there were 25 children, a stray dog, and my girlfriend standing in the middle of a teeming mass of children, wearing one flip-flop and sporting a black eye. She must have heard me come out because she turns around, shakes her head, and gives me the finger. Well, that's no way to greet your girlfriend. So I ignored her and sat back down in my lawn chair. A couple of minutes later, she staggers back up onto the porch, kicks open the cooler and grabs a Hawaiian Punch fruit box, sits down and places it over her black eye. I figure it's probably not a good idea to say anything, so I just sit there quietly. And this goes on for about 5 minutes or so until she looks over at me and asks, "Where's the little girl?" Now, my first thought is, what little girl? Until it dawns on me, oh yeah, the one I was supposed to be watching. The one whom I was supposed to be ensuring didn't die. It is at that particular juncture where Crazytown lays into me. She starts screaming at me like some sort of prehistoric bird, telling me that I am a rotten friend, that I don't support her, and that I am an even worse babysitter. She was 100% right. But I can only say that in hindsight. At the time, I was just pissed off. So I start screaming back at her. I call her a flake, tell her that this whole venture was a stupid idea, and that she really needed a babysitter more than she should be one. It was easily the nastiest, most vicious fight I have ever gotten into anybody whom I have called a friend. And I think both of us felt pretty guilty about the whole thing because we instantly just stopped. And then we realized we had a bigger problem. We had a missing child on our hands. Now, of course, we didn't actually have any sort of protocol in place to deal with a situation like this. Kind of like we hadn't planned on what to do in case it rained. Now, we didn't know this little girl's name, so we couldn't exactly call for her. So we just ran out into the yard and started grabbing every kid we saw. "Hey, you seen a little blonde-haired girl? No, you're useless. Go home." Well, it took about 10 minutes or so, but we ultimately found the little girl hanging out underneath the slide. And it turns out that she had, for the past, half hour or so, been slowly and methodically stuffing her ears full of gravel. Because you see, that's what they built play sets on back then. Not wood chips, not foam, gravel to break a kid's fall. And she was sitting in a giant pile of it. And as we stood there staring at her in bewilderment, she started to eat the rocks. She seemed perfectly content by the whole situation, but Crazytown and I freaked the fuck out. We grabbed that kid, hauled her into the house, and did our best to shake out as many rocks as we could. But she'd done a good job. She'd really jammed those things into her skull. And since neither one of us wanted to go digging around in there, we did the only thing we could think of. We called 911. Oh, y'all, it was mortifying. After the 911 operator got through laughing at us, she was kind enough to send some paramedics to the house who, after they got through laughing at us, were able to pull out a big long pair of tweezers and remove the remaining pebbles from her cranium. Then, of course, they were nice enough to sit down and treat my poor girlfriend's black eye. And she, the lucky dog, walked away with 2 new phone numbers in her pocket. Unfortunately for everyone, the sight of paramedics in front of Camp Crazytown ultimately shut us down. Parents from around town showed up out of nowhere to pick their kids up and yell at us and threaten to call the cops. Even the little blonde-haired girl's mother showed up and gave us a huge chewing out for being negligent, but frankly, I think she might have been a little bit more negligent than us. Because who in their right mind is going to leave a toddler with 2 20-year-old college girls? Anyway, we ultimately wound up in the exact same place where we started, sitting at her parents' kitchen table. We were drinking whiskey straight this time, still jobless, and Crazytown had that mysterious black eye that, to this day, I still do not know how she acquired. We were both beaten and battered and tired, and she looks up at me and says, "I hate you." And I looked back at my gorgeous girlfriend and I said, "I hate you too." Surprisingly, this little business venture is not what ended our friendship. Ultimately, that happened a while later when I attempted to sell her off to a strip club. But that, of course, is a story for another day. And right now, I need more bourbon. Hang on, y'all. Oh, all right. Sweet, sweet bourbon. Well, I think it's about time I wrap things up here, y'all. Remember, if you want to connect with me or hear back episodes of this show, just go to theunwritablерant.com. And you'll also find a little pretty subscription box. You can sign up there to receive my newsletter. Every so often, I will send you crazy little videos of me doing random things, some of my bourbon recommendations, and you'll even get early access to celebrity interviews. And remember, I love your bourbon recommendations. Just because I wasn't a fan of this particular bourbon today doesn't mean I don't want to hear all of your favorites. Send them my way. I will be happy to try them all. And with that, I'm out of here, y'all. Hope you have a great week. I will be back to chat with you again next week. Cheers, y'all.
Go to theunwritablерant.com and sign up to get early access to interviews and new videos. You can hear new episodes of The Unwritable Rant on radiovegas.rocks every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern and on IPMNation.com on Saturdays and Sundays at 6 p.m. Eastern, and hear best of episodes every weekday at 3 p.m. Eastern. And don't forget to connect with Juliette on Twitter at Morning Neurosis.
Girl, you was pretty as a Sunday morning, standing on the corner at Carondelet. What you say we make our way up to Bourbon, a couple hurricanes and a hand grenade, and get blown away. Let the chips fall where they may. If it's all the same, what you say, bon ton, hey, pretty mama, I can smell the gumbo. Sweetest taste of honeysuckle on my lips. Good God Almighty, I can hear the trombone. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this. Come a little closer, honey, let me hold you. Nothing tastes better than a bourbon kiss. You can be the flower on my magnolia. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm.